of King Frederick the Great of Prussia, the man who established Berlin as a center for radical thought and who extended his empire in a series of vicious wars. To understand Frederick is to understand Berlin. Frederick's ideas run like a bloody thread through the history of this city, inspiring both horror and hope. Frederick, or Fritz as he was known, was born in 1712. He lived and reigned before Germany had become a unified nation, when Berlin was still a fledgling capital of the Kingdom of Prussia. Frederick's upbringing was a baptism of fire, courtesy of a father obsessed with the military. The story goes that young Fritz was woken up every day by a cannon barrage outside his window to get him used to the sound of gunfire. He learnt the 54 movements of the Prussian drill code until he knew them backwards. Then followed his own army of child cadets. It was a school of tyranny. At 16, the young Fritz began to rebel. He got his tutors to teach him classical poetry and the flute against his father's will. He also started to live a double life, outwardly conforming to his father's strict wishes, but secretly amassing a library of forbidden poems and philosophy. Eventually, this difference between father and son was to come to light with tragic consequences. Hans von Katte was a captain in the Prussian army. He developed a close, possibly homosexual relationship with the 18-year-old Fritz. The two friends planned to run away to England while the king was away inspecting his army. But they were betrayed. The king imprisoned his own son and then forced him to watch the beheading of Katte from the window of his cell. It was an act of brutality that would overshadow his life. As a king, Frederick the Great built Sanssouci Palace, a Rococo refuge from the world. Frederick became a great patron of the arts. Himself an accomplished flautist, it was he who gave the concerts. He was a modern man who was molded by the spirit of his times, the spirit of the Enlightenment, and most specifically by the French philosopher Voltaire. Voltaire was a revolutionary thinker. He promoted social reform and equality. He was in love with rationality, and he passionately believed that education would further human betterment. At a time when Europe's monarchs firmly believed in their God-given right to rule over their subjects, Voltaire's ideas were nothing short of explosive. But one monarch who did not see him as a threat was Frederick the Great. The king paid Voltaire a yearly salary, and the writer was an ever-present member of Frederick's group of artists and philosophers. Along with Voltaire, Frederick penned an attack on the despotism of princes and the divine rights of kings. It was an ironic prophecy for Berlin.
Kings have the capacity to do good when they have the will. In the same way, they can also make evil. The lives of the people are sometimes pitiable, and they have very good reason to fear abuse of the sovereign power. Their freedom is at the mercy of his whims. Their very lives are subject to his cruelties. The sovereign, far from being the absolute master of the people which are under his domination, is only the first servant.
Enlightened views, and they are reflected in the very architecture of the marble hall. Urania, the goddess of free nature and life. Apollo, god of the arts. But for all his enlightened ideas, many would argue that Frederick wasn't so great. There's another side to his character also reflected in this room. The tools of battle, glorified. However much Frederick rebelled against the military traditions of his family, they were in his blood, and he himself began to hunger for territory. Frederick the Great invaded Saxony. He fought wars with Austria, France, and Russia. He even acquired a sizable chunk of Poland. And yet all the time, his flute music could be heard at night drifting across the military encampments. The warrior philosopher playing his troops to sleep. He was a pretty complex, divided sort of fellow. Perfect for the shrink, you might say.